Again, my name is Mara Walsh. I am in the United States and specifically between Philadelphia and New York. The reason that's important is because all of my tours are in the Eastern time zone. So if you're using that information to convert to your local time, you can use either New York or Philadelphia to do that. When we're not traveling virtually, I host groups on physical tours as well as help others plan their own family and group vacations. Don't let the name Girl Travel Tours fool you. We welcome all folks on our tours, not just girls. The name came about when I started leading tours because I started leading physical tours as a Girl Scout leader with EF Tours for Girls. But now I lead tours for all ages, from teens through senior citizens. Some of my tours are specifically adult only. So if you're interested in joining us, just please let me know. But when COVID struck, we were unable to travel physically. So I started traveling with my tour guide friends virtually. I really wanted to support the tour director community during this time of travel restrictions where they were not able to work. And I really wanted to keep the excitement of travel alive for my group and extend that opportunity to those of you who've learned about us through their friends, their family, and on social media. And thankfully, these virtual tour presentations have served both purposes quite well. We've done about 75 tours since the start of COVID. If you would like to access any of the recordings, they are all available on Girl Travel Tours, my website, as well as my Facebook page and my YouTube channel. We have several more tours planned for this coming year. Many are listed on my website and are open for registration. And some of these are not listed yet, but will be added soon. I'll go over them right now so that you can see them. We have Scotch, a tasting tour coming up next week, Bucharest, Romania, Piedmont, Italy, a National Parks Canyon country adventure, Marche, Italy, Madrid, Slovenia, and Cayman Islands. So you'll see that those are coming up soon and you can register. I just put up Marche, Italy, and Cayman Islands today so that you can register for them. And Slovenia is quick to follow after that. As long as you're interested in viewing these virtual tour presentations, we will continue to produce them for you. And just a quick heads up regarding the Facebook folks, you can use the feed there and you can make sure that, you know, if you want to stream via telecast, you can do that through Facebook as well. Closed captions are also available on Facebook. So if you'd like to have that enriched experience, you can go on over to our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Girl Travel Tours. I want to review a few ways you can interact with us during the event. Feel free to ask questions about the tour director, or my travel program using the Q&A link on the Zoom toolbar. And you also can pop some questions in the chat if you'd like me to deal with them during the event. I can do that as well. If you're viewing us on a desktop, you may have to change the vertical toolbar between the video and the presentation screen to maximize the presentation screen. If you're viewing us on a handheld device, you may have to swipe left or right and just look at the presentation screen as opposed to the speaker's video. Okay, well, it's time for our poll. I always like to launch a poll to give us an understanding of the audience's understanding of the subject matter we're going to be producing today. And we're going to talk about Stonehenge. So the question is, what's your connection to Stonehenge? I've been in Love-It. I have a trip booked. I plan to go in the future. I have no set plans, but I'm interested in the location, or I am solely interested in experiencing it virtually. And George and I were talking just before we got online. Maybe I should have added another selection, which is I have visited, but I don't want to go back now that the iron gates are all around it. Anyway, let's see. We'll end this poll and we'll see what's going on. It looks like we have about Wow, 41% say that they have no set plans, but they're interested in the location. But more than 30% have been and loved it. And I am definitely in I'm definitely in that segment of our audience, because it is an amazingly magical place, which really makes your head spin a little bit when you think about it, when you visit. So hopefully George will be able to share some of that with us tonight. Today's tour, I'm going to just pop out of that poll. So if it doesn't come off your screen, just hit the X button on the top left, and that will get it from being in front of the presentation. Today's tour, like all of our tours, are scheduled for 90 minutes plus a Q&A. So hopefully you are ready for the presentation, and we're ready to go. A tour wouldn't be complete without a fantastic tour director. And today we have George, a fan favorite, back to share the tales of the Neolithic times in the British Isles. I am sure you will enjoy this tour, as we have always enjoyed the tours that George have brought in the past. Okay, I will share via chat during the Q&A and after words how you can tip the tour guide. All the tips go directly to the guide once collected, minus the Zoom operating expenses. So today I want to introduce George and welcome back to the program. We haven't seen you in a while. Happy New Year, George. Come on. And if you're ready, you can say hello and share the controls and get us going.
Yeah. Hello.
Do you have stage fright today, George?
No. Can you see me? Can you see me now?
I can see you, and I can see your screen is coming up. So I think we're almost ready.
Still haven't got the hang of this. Bear with me. Hello, everybody. How are you? Okay. Is that it?
I think it's going to come up in a second. It says that you've started screen sharing. Yes, we're good, George.
Yeah, good. So I'm moving around now. Okay. Hi, everybody. How are you? Happy New Year. Thank you very much, Mara, for asking me back. I hope you're all well wherever you are. Yeah, I'm delighted to be back. And I was just chatting to Mara before. Stonehenge is somewhere where I do my job as a tour guide. I seem to spend a lot of my life. I used to spend a lot of my life in Stonehenge with different groups of tourists generally from America and Canada. But yeah, I haven't been back for a long time, so it's been very it's been very emotional getting this tour together. But we're not just going to do Stonehenge. It's basically going to be a tour of various famous Neolithic sites around the British Isles, ending with Stonehenge. As with previous tours, I'm going to do it like a fake tour. So we're going to start off in Ireland, and then we're going to pretend that we're going on an actual tour. This tour involves a lot of long distances, though. So for this pretend virtual tour, we're going to be taking aeroplanes, which is a first for me on this Zoom format. But first, a bit of background about this era of British history, but it's not really history. It's what we call prehistory, which is it's not a term I'm particularly comfortable with, because prehistory basically means before history, but we kind of measure history in the British Isles from when the Romans settled in 43 AD. And they were the first people to write things down. So we consider this to be the beginning of the historical period, and everything beforehand is prehistoric. The period we're talking about today is the Neolithic age, which is, as I'm sure you all know this, but I would just to go over basics, the Stone Age is lazily divided into three sections. The Stone Age, by far the longest stage of human history, and the final stage, the Neolithic stage, is like the new Stone Age. It says here 8,000 to 3,000 BC. I think most people measure it to 8,000 to about 2,000 BC, but let's not quibble about that. Mesolithic is the middle, and Paleolithic is the earliest one. So we're going to be dealing with the Neolithic, which is the end of the Stone Age, which sounds like a very long time ago, doesn't it? But a bit of prehistory, basically talking about the British Isles. This is what the British Isles looked like before the end of the last ice age around 10,000 years ago. As you can see, what is now England, Wales, and Scotland was not an island. In fact, it was joined to the European mainland. Ireland the island off to the west was not attached to the island. So the island was always an island, whereas England and Wales and Scotland were joined to the European landmass until the end of the last ice age, when the glacial melt covered the land, joining what is nowadays between Holland and Belgium and Norfolk in England and East Anglia. And it covered this part of land called Doggerland, and it created this island. Before this period, there had been humans who had been hunters and gatherers. This is the most famous one. He's our Mesolithic poster boy in the UK. He's the oldest surviving resident of the British Isles that we've found, around 10,000 years old. We call him Cheddar Man. Nothing to do with cheese. It's because he was found in this famous gorge called Cheddar Gorge, which is in the southwest of England, very near the city of Bristol and Glastonbury. You might have heard of Glastonbury, very famous esoteric town. It's also very close to Stonehenge, where we're going to end our tour today. But Cheddar Man, yeah, 10,000 years old, roughly. And he's what we would call a hunter-gatherer. So he would have ended, his people would have ended up in Britain, probably as a result of hunting, probably following the herds to the western extent of the European landmass, and ended up in these islands. This is a rough approximation of what he looked like: dark skin, blue eyes, dark hair. And he is our hunter-gatherer ancestor. But after they arrived, as you can see, the ice age ended, the glacial melt covered what is this part of land called Doggerland, and we became an island at that point. And this was around 10,000 years ago, something like that, roughly. And after that, the hunter-gatherers were isolated on the island, and the next people to arrive on the island were some people that were very different to the hunter-gatherers, and they came from this place, Anatolia, which is in modern-day Turkey, and it's the most incredible country. This is actually what it looks like. There's very famous balloon riding activities, balloon festival that you can do in Anatolia. And there was this movement of agricultural people, the first European farmers, if you like, that came from modern-day Anatolia, and they went west across Europe, as you can see on this map. And they went west in two distinct groups. The first main group went along the coast of the Mediterranean, ended up in what is now Spain, the Iberian Peninsula. And from there, many of those people traveled north by sea and ended up in Ireland and Cornwall and the west coast of England. And these are the ancestors of ours who are the Neolithic people that we're going to be talking about today, who built the stone circles and the burial chambers that we're going to be discussing today. And when these people arrived in the British Isles, they replaced the hunter-gatherers. There wasn't hardly any overspill except in the northwest of Scotland, but they completely replaced these people. And they were a very, very different set of people. In lots of ways, I think that this is almost the beginning of modern life. These people were so similar to how we are today, I think. This woman is an approximation of what we think these people look like. She's known as White Hawk Woman. Her remains were found in Sussex in England, and she was of this group that I'm going to, for the ease of the presentation, let's just call them the Turkish Farmers, right? So she was with the Turkish Farmers, came over, and they settled around 4000 BC. Okay, they left Anatolia around 8000 BC, and they arrived in England around 4000 BC. So there was a gradual spread west from Turkey, and what they brought with them was agriculture. And by bringing agriculture, they brought effectively civilization, the first communities where we all lived together, unlike the hunter-gatherers. And this is an impression of a Neolithic village. And for my money, this looks very similar to how we live today. They lived in settlements together. They lived in houses. They wore clothes. They woke up in the morning. They went to work on the land. They had livestock. They went to work on the land. When the sun set, they came home. They cooked food with their family, with their friends. They sat around the fire. They told stories. They had a laugh. They drank booze. Even their diet was very similar to ours compared to the hunter-gatherers. They ate bread They ate dairy products. So really, it was a massive shift that happened to human beings with the arrival of these people. It's a massive, massive shift. They had jewelry, pottery, they wore makeup. So yeah, entirely modern. There's lots of things we don't know about these people, and will always remain a mystery. The language, we don't know too much about the language they used or how much language they used. They think that the closest language that still exists to the language that they were likely to have spoken is modern day Basque, the language from the Basque country, bordering on France and Spain. But that's these people. And the other thing that we don't know about them much is their religion and their belief systems. What did they believe? What did they believe in? Well, what we do know is that they built these stone circles and burial chambers. Now, the burial chambers came first. And as I said, they arrived around 4000 BC, but it seems that about 1,000 years later, they started building in earnest. So something must have triggered them to start building initially burial chambers, but after a while, they stopped building the burial chambers and they started building what we call henges. Now, do you all know what a henge is? A henge is what this slide, what this photograph is a textbook henge, okay? It's a ridge, a round mound of earth, and on the inside of the mound is a ditch. Now, it was circular. It was definitely very circular, and we think this is probably to reflect the sun and the moon. These people were agricultural people. They worshipped the sun and the moon, and the circle would have represented also the horizon, and also maybe eternity and the cycle of the seasons, which to them was life and death. But the henges, we're almost certain they're not for defensive purposes, because if they were defensive, the ditch would be on the outside of the mound and not on the inside. So maybe it's more likely that they were trying to keep things from leaving than from coming in. But our guess is that these henges were used as a cross between a modern day church, a modern day theatre, but also actually like a modern day clock or a modern day calendar. This is how people told what time of the year it was, how to expect the changing of the seasons. So it was all these things rolled into one. This is as much as we guess. The other thing we know about these people's religious beliefs is that they believed in the afterlife. We found burials where they were buried with tools and food, and also in burial chambers, which we're going to touch on soon. They venerated their ancestors. Ancestor worship was central to their culture. However, we think that they venerated their ancestors collectively, not individually, because when we've found collections of remains, they all tend to be lots of different ones jumbled together, not individuals. So there seems to be a veneration of collective ancestry. But these people were incredibly technologically advanced in so many ways. When we think of Stone Age people, we don't think of advanced civilization. These people were incredible boat builders. They were incredible astronomers. They understood the heavens and the path of the stars and the sun and the planets much better than we do, certainly better than I do. I guess in those days when they had finished their dinner in the evening and they'd finished telling stories, they didn't, for want of television or social media, all they had instead was the firmament of the heavens to look at and work out where they were in relation to the different stars. So they knew the stars in the sky as well as we know television and sort of for social media celebrity garbage. So they're very clever people, and they made incredibly widespread and far traveled as well, as we're going to hear later on in today. And here is a log boat that Neolithic people would have traveled in. This is how they would have arrived in the British Isles for a start. And in the beginning of our tour, we're actually, if you'll entertain the thought, we're all going to get into a log boat each from where you've landed. Let's say you've landed in Bristol. We're going to get in log boats and we're going to go up the coast, the west coast of England, and arrive at our first destination, which is in the Republic of Ireland, and just 30 miles north of Dublin. We're going to go to our first major Neolithic site, which is, I think, one of the most exciting. I'm going to say this about everywhere we visit today. One of the most exciting places to visit, I think, in the British Isles. And it's, if you go just north of Dublin, you get to this river called the River Boyne. It's very important in Irish history for lots of reasons. There was a very famous siege took place there in 1649. The English politician and general Oliver Cromwell laid siege to the town of Drogheda, and a very brutal siege. And also very famously in 1690, there's this famous Battle of the Boyne, where King James II of England was defeated by William of Orange, the Protestant Dutch king. This is a very central battle to modern Irish history, but we're not talking about that today. We're talking about much further back in history, prehistory indeed. If you carry on up the River Boyne from Drogheda, we get to this place, Newgrange. Now, Newgrange is one of the most exciting Neolithic sites in the world. It's 1,000 years older than Stonehenge. It's 800 years older than the Great Pyramids of Giza. And it's here in Ireland. The people that built Newgrange had lived in this area for more than 1,000 years before they started building it. And as I said before, when they started building it, they started building it in earnest. If you think about, for a Neolithic community to build one of these sites like Newgrange or Stonehenge, it would have been a full-time occupation. Newgrange, they think, took something like 400 men, about 30 years to build. Now that is probably more than one lifetime at that time. So you'd have to be quite economically comfortable in order to dedicate several generations of people to build these things. Then what I'm trying to say is they were obviously of the utmost importance that these were built. Newgrange was only discovered very recently. I mean, it had been, here's what it used to look like. It was discovered in 1699. I think the locals had always known about it, but it was actually only in the 1960s that it was excavated for the first time, and they discovered what they had here in Ireland. It's about 3,200 BC, they think it was built. And as you can see, it's basically a man-made hill. It's a passage tomb. And we're going to go inside the tomb in a minute. There's a there's an entrance. There's a long passageway, and inside, about 20 meters along the passageway, there's a central chamber. These were built. Yeah, as I say, about 200,000 tons of earth were placed on top of this passageway and chamber, which would have taken an awful lot of effort to carry up the hill to Newgrange in place. They would have log rolled the biggest stones up. Now, this is what Newgrange looks like now, by the way, but unlike a lot of the other sites we're going to see today, I'm afraid Newgrange this is what it used to look like, and it was rebuilt in the 1960s by the guy Michael O'Kelly is the name of the archaeologist. It's quite controversial, the rebuilding. The chamber inside remained the same, but he built this enormous quartz wall around the side of it, which a lot of people don't like today. I think it's okay. These quartz stones were actually in the original building of Newgrange. He just repurposed them and built this large wall around the side. But it's a really, really incredible site. And here it is from above. And what's incredible about it is that it lines up perfectly with the winter solstice. This is the entranceway. You can see the stone in front of the entrance has these amazing designs on it. We're going to talk about those designs in a little bit, but this is the entranceway. And above the entrance, there's this famous rectangle called the roof box. Now, the roof box is where the winter solstice light shines down, and the passageway, as you can see, slopes up. So as the winter solstice light comes down the passageway, it goes over the heads of the people and illuminates the chamber at the very center of the Newgrange burial chamber. Now, there's lots of reasons for them having built this. One of them is to venerate the dead. They found remains of the ancestors inside. This is what it looks like, the sun coming in down the passageway. And this is the chamber in the middle with the sun, when the sun first hits, and afterwards when the chamber is filled with light. And it's to venerate the death. And we can get an idea about the religion of these people from this, because I think there's a theory that I think is fairly good. I believe in it, which is that this passageway also represents the reproductive organs of the female as well. So you have the entranceway and you have the passageway and then the womb in the middle. And this bright light of the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, basically reawakening the spirit of the dead and the ancestors within the tomb. So it kind of represents the reawakening of the spirit. If you think about in these times, in the winter where everything was dead, this really was a very difficult time. And the winter solstice would represent the rebirth of the world, of nature. So this was very closely tied to human fertility. So you've got death, you've got fertility, incredible astronomy. It's the most remarkable site. If you want to go to Newgrange, you can visit it. But if you want to go for the winter solstice, there's a lottery that you have to apply for online. I think something like 500,000 people apply, and if you get your name gets drawn out of a hat, then you get to go into Newgrange for the winter solstice. Obviously, because it's Ireland, you're probably going to be lucky if there's any sun on the winter solstice, but it's worth entering that draw for anyway. These designs on the rocks I said I would talk about, they're very famous. They're called the tri-spiral designs, and you don't find these on any other Neolithic sites anywhere. A lot of people think they look Celtic, but then they predate the Celtic culture by about 2,500 years. So if anything, the Celtic art resembles the Neolithic art. But yeah, this has gone on to be used by Irish Christians to represent the Trinity. It was adopted by the Celts, then adopted by the Christians. It's very, very identifiable Irish art that we associate with Ireland. So yeah, Newgrange, absolutely incredible to visit, and a must visit. And not a lot of people know about it. It should be easily as famous as Stonehenge, easily as famous. It's an incredible site. And there's lots of other Neolithic sites around Ireland. The other one that I'm going to touch on today, which is very close, in fact, to Newgrange, is the Hill of Tara. In fact, I was there with Mara just a couple of years ago. And the Hill of Tara is another spot in Ireland that not a lot of people, when they visit Ireland, know about the Hill of Tara, but it's one of the most important sites in Ireland, both for Neolithic Ireland, for Neolithic Ireland, for Iron Age Ireland, Bronze Age Ireland, and right up to the modern day. It is an incredible hill where you get an amazing view of Ireland all around you. And there's various sites from different ages. For example, the Mound of Hostages, roughly around the same period as Newgrange. And this one, instead of lining up with the winter solstice, actually lines up with the sun on the festival of Samhain, which is the festival to mark the beginning of winter, which roughly corresponds to modern day Halloween. Halloween is like the modern version of this ancient festival to celebrate basically the beginning of winter, the onset of the gloom. So this is the Mount of Hostages on the Hill of Tara. Also on the Hill of Tara, you have the Stone of Destiny. This is where the High Kings of Ireland were inaugurated historically, right from the Bronze Age onwards. And even as late as 1845, there was a very famous event here on the Hill of Tara, a very famous modern Irish leader called Daniel O'Connell, the great emancipator. He freed Ireland from the penal laws that had been introduced by the British, and was instrumental in leading the way to Irish self-government. And he held a huge event here in 1845 where 750,000 people gathered here at the Hill of Tara in the ancestral heartland of Ireland. So it's an incredibly important site in Ireland, very close to Newgrange. You can easily do them both on the same day. So very interesting from all periods of history, but also exceptionally beautiful as well. So we're going to have to leave Ireland pronto, I'm afraid, and we're going to get on the Irish ferry in Dublin and head across the sea to Wales. Now, Wales, as I'm sure some of you, I already did a tour for Mara on Wales and Cornwall, and I was pointing out that in terms of mainland Britain, Wales and Cornwall are kind of like the ancient heart of Britain, as people moved from the east into the country, the Anglos, the Romans, the Anglo-Saxons, the original people and their language and their cultures were pushed west into Wales and Cornwall. So Wales is an exceptionally sacred part of Britain. And this is also reflected in many, many famous monuments, and none of them as famous as Stonehenge, Newgrange, but we're going to hear there is a connection between Stonehenge and Wales, which we'll hear about at the end. But we're going to arrive here at Holyhead on the island of Anglesey, and the island of Anglesey was actually the most important part of the British Isles for Bronze Age Druids. Now, there's a lot of people get very mixed up about Druids and Stonehenge and stone circles. The stone circles and Stonehenge, the Neolithic stone circles, they had nothing to do with the Druids. The Druids were much later. There's not even any evidence that the Druids used or utilized the stone circles in any way. However, because Anglesey was a very fertile part of the country, it still is today known as the breadbasket of Wales. It's very likely that the Neolithic people settled here before the Druids, and this is an important site for them, as reflected by very famous sites such as this one. This is Bryn Kettley Du, which is, unlike most Neolithic sites, it actually started off as a henge, and later, during the later Iron Age, became a burial mound, similar to, but not as impressive as, Newgrange. But there's other various mounds and stone circles, and also dolmens all over Wales. Dolmen is one stone balanced on top of two or three other stones. But we haven't really got much time to hang around in Wales. We're just passing through Anglesey on our way up to Scotland, which is our next most important site. But as we're driving up to Glasgow, which is where we're going to have to get a plane from, we're going to drive through this very beautiful part of northern England on the northwest coast, known as the Lake District. The Lake District, as you can see from this photograph, is very beautiful. It's famous for being one of the most beautiful parts of the British Isles. It has the highest mountain in England in it, Scafell Peak, and it's famous for many things. It's famous for the lake poets, Wordsworth and Coleridge and De Quincey, people like that. They're famously settled in the Lake District in the 19th century and wrote lots of poems, the Daffodils, for example. It's also famous for Beatrix Potter, or her books, where she lived in and worked in the Lake District. Her books were set there. But it's also the site of some of the most unknown Neolithic stone circles, which not a lot of people know about. If you're the sort of person that wants a stone circle all to yourself, you don't like sharing your stone circles, then Stonehenge probably isn't for you. But the stone circles in the Lake District are incredible. Okay, this is probably the second most famous one. This is Castle Rig Stone Circle, and this is in the Lake District, and this is arguably one of the oldest stone circles that they've found in the British Isles. It's a little bit later than Newgrange, but way before Stonehenge, and not that far away from Castle Rig Stone Circle. We're just passing through. We haven't got time to stop for long. Is this other very famous one? You can see it's right next to the Druid Circle, and it's called Long Meg and Her Daughters. I think, without a doubt, it's the best named stone circle out of all the stone circles. And this rock in the foreground, this is Long Meg, and Long Meg and her daughters. That's her daughters. There's 59 stones, so I presume that Long Meg had 58 daughters. The legend goes that it was a witch. Long Meg was a witch, and it was in fact a coven of witches led by Long Meg. Long Meg was based on a real witch, apparently, and they were turned to stone by a Scottish wizard called Michael Scott, apparently, and that's the story. Apparently, also, if you count how many stones there are in the circle and you accurately count the same number twice, then the spell is reversed and the stones turn back into witches. I did actually tell you how many stones there were in the beginning. Obviously, I didn't walk around and count them twice, but I just got my information from the internet. But yes, 59 stones apparently. Long Meg and her daughters. And these were used in a film called The Sightseers, 2012 horror film. There's a lot of horror films in Britain based around stone circles and the Neolithic peoples and pagan beliefs and pre-Christian religions. And that's one of them, the Sightseers. Kendal mint cake. I know we always like to get at least one snack into these tours. Kendal mint cake is very famous Victorian candy from the town of Kendal in the Lake District. If you want to know what it tastes like, I would say it tastes like, it's like a minty soap. If you like a sort of really sweet minty bar of soap, that's what Kendal mint cake tastes like. That's the kind of candy that the Victorians were eating, and they marketed it as a candy for people that like to climb mountains and really hardy outdoors people, you know, Scott of the Antarctic, Shackleton up Everest. Those were the sort of people that ate Kendal mint cake. And in fact, you can see Kendal on the map there down in the south. That's right in the Lake District. We're heading up the M6 motorway, past the Lake District, up past the town of Carlisle. And before we get into Scotland, just as we get into Scotland, we're going to stop off very quickly for a cup of tea at a famous town called Gretna Green. Gretna Green is very famous for one thing. It's famous because it's where you get married. It's where you could get married at the age of 16. In Scotland, you could get married at the age of 16 without your parents' permission. In England, you had to be 18. So traditionally, in the 18th and 19th centuries, if you wanted to get married without your parents' permission in England, you'd run away to Scotland. And the first place you could get married in Scotland was Gretna Green. You'd get married at the blacksmiths. He had a license to marry people, and it was a great tradition to get married in Gretna Green. And still to this day, people get married there. Nothing to do with Neolithic people whatsoever, but I guess it's got something to do with fertility rights, possibly. Let's just tie it in that way, possibly. So that's Gretna Green on the way past the Lake District, on the way to Glasgow. And in Glasgow, we haven't got any time to stop and have fun in Glasgow, even though it's a great town, because we've got to head to our next destination on an aeroplane, which is very unheard of on these tours. But our destination is to the northeast of Scotland, to these islands off the very north coast called the Orkney Islands. Now, the Orkney Islands are absolutely incredible. There's these two sets of islands off the northeast coast. The Orkneys are the ones nearest to the mainland, and then beyond them you have the Shetlands. And these are both the Shetlands and the Orkneys for a long time belonged to Norway, in fact. And even to this day, they use a lot of language which is very influenced by Norse dialect. But Orkney is without a doubt, after the area of Stonehenge and that area, the most famous Neolithic part of the British Isles. Orkney is made up of over 70 islands, and it's an archipelago. The most people live on the island called mainland Orkney. The capital is this town called Kirkwall. 15,000 people live in Kirkwall. And it's an incredible place if you are interested in Neolithic stone circles and burial chambers, because they are chock-a-block, absolutely everywhere. And the most famous one is this. It's called Scarra Bray. It's known as the Scottish Pompeii, if you like. And it's the best preserved Neolithic village in the whole of Europe. And it was discovered in 1850. There was an enormous storm that ripped through the Orkney Islands. The Orkneys, I've spent quite a lot of time in the Orkney Islands, and they are very windy. So there's a lot of storms there. But in this storm in 1850, the roof, this hill was basically blown apart, and underneath the hill, they discovered this perfectly preserved Neolithic village of 10 houses. And these houses are what we now call Scarra Bray. Bray is the Scottish word for hill. You may know the Robert Burns poem, Banks and Braes. Bray just means hill in Scotland. And Scarra is the name of the area. And the houses were built into the earth, which is actually quite trendy these days with people that like to build eco houses and things. A little bit like this house, like the little Hobbit house. The houses were actually, they were built of flagstones. You can see the flagstones here. And then on the outside of the flagstones, they basically supported them with mud and waste, what we call in Scotland midden. And these were incredibly cozy little houses. They're all connected by internal passageways. This is what they would have looked like at the time. And it was around 3180 BC is what they've dated the construction to. And people lived in Scarra Bray for 600 years undisturbed. And it's a very ideal looking life that they led. They grew barley. They had livestock. We know this from the remains that we found there. They were fishermen. And one of the houses has a different layout to the others. And we know that it's a workshop where they made tools and pottery and jewelry. And this is the layout of the inside of one of the houses of Scarra Bray. It must be said that all the houses in Scarra Bray are all very similar layout, which makes us think that it was a very communal society. There was no hierarchy. There wasn't one house that was really fancy and clearly belonged to somebody who was more important than somebody else. They all lived relatively equal lives. And as you can see from this layout, they had beds. There's two beds on either side, one bigger bed than the other. They've even got cupboards and storage, which you can see along the back wall there. And in the middle, they would have had the hearth and the fire, which would have been the center of the home. Even some of the houses had a toilet in Scarra Bray. They had a hole with a small ditch underneath it, a small drain underneath it, which led out to the sea. So they even had Neolithic toilets in Scarra Bray. And I've been there myself. And it's, for my money, the most incredible Neolithic site that I've ever witnessed. It's the thing that amazes me about these people is how modern they seem, how not very different to us they seem in so many ways. I think when I was young, I used to think the Stone Age people were, like living in caves and things, but they're so similar to us in so many ways. Here's this guy. He's lying down in one of the beds in Scarra Bray. He's looking a little bit nervous. This is the other thing that they're famous for in Scarra Bray is grooved ware pottery. This is a very popular type of pottery with people of the Neolithic period. And they think that in Scarra Bray, they specialized in this grooved ware pottery. They found remains from a similar time all around different locations in Scotland and England and Ireland as well. So the people of Scarra Bray led a very nice life. One great mystery about Scarra Bray is why they left, because they seem to have left very quickly, because they left many of their possessions still in the house. So it doesn't seem like a gradual move away. So there's various theories. One theory would be that maybe there was a devastating storm or a series of terrible storms. There's a lot of sandstorms you get in that part of Orkney. They're on the west coast of Orkney, so they're facing the Atlantic. Next stop Canada. It's a very, very desolate part of the world, but so we don't really know why they left. That's one of the great mysteries of Scarra Bray. It's the great mystery of Scarra Bray. And also on mainland Orkney, not far from Scarra Bray, is two very famous stone circles and a very famous burial chamber, all within 2 square miles. This is the Maize burial chamber. It's actually very similar to Newgrange. It's a little bit later. It's maybe 400 years later. And they think that whoever built this definitely was aware of Newgrange because the similarities are very, very striking. This burial chamber you can visit now, but for many years it was closed up. And this is what it looks like on the inside. But for many years it was closed up. And when they discovered it eventually, they found that they weren't the first people to visit it because it had been broken into in the 12th century by Vikings, because the Orkneys and the Shetlands were the main bases for the Vikings for a long time as they were attacking parts of mainland Britain. And it is got the Maize burial chamber has got the largest collection of Viking graffiti out of anywhere in the world. This is the runes, the Viking runes, and they're written all over the walls of the burial chamber. And basically these Vikings, they write an account of it. They had to break into this chamber during a storm and shelter from the storm and sleep there. 2 of them went mad in the process. and had to be killed. It's written into one of these sagas about the Vikings staying in Maize burial ground. It's an incredible story if you want to look it up. But the graffiti, the translations on the internet are hilarious. It's things like they're just slagging each other off. They're teasing each other, saying rude things about each other. There's a lot of very rude stuff that I couldn't repeat now, but basically things about bragging about who's the best at fighting and that sort of thing. Eric was here. That's literally that sort of thing. Very childish Viking graffiti in the Maize burial chamber, but it's an incredible thing to go and visit. And very close to that, you have these stones, which are the stones of Stonehenge. And at one time, these would have been a circle of 12 stones. There's only 4 remaining now. But this is, they think, the oldest stone circle in the British Isles. And whenever you go to visit it, the livestock in this photograph, they're always in the middle of the stone circle. And the same is true of other stone circles I've been to. There's something, maybe something to do with the magnetism or something that always draws the animals to the middle of the stone circles. And this is one of the 2 famous stone circles in the Orkneys, but the most famous, I would say, is this, the Ring of Brodgar. Now, the Ring of Brodgar is so impressive. For me, it's the most impressive stone circle, but it's very hard to do it justice with these photographs. But I've got a couple, and this one from above. It is absolutely huge. And it's, out of all the stone circles, it's nearly a perfect circle as well. Most stone circles aren't very precise circles, but Brodgar, they think, is a very, very perfect circle. And you can see that it is a textbook henge. You have the mound on the outside, the ditch on the inside. If anything, by the end of this tour, if you didn't know beforehand, you'll at least know what a henge is. And this is the Henge of Brodgar. One interesting thing about Brodgar is that the stones of Brodgar are made of lots of different types of stone that come from all different parts of the Orkneys. So they think, one theory for this is that different people from different Neolithic settlements brought stones with them as part of some ceremony, maybe a coming together of different tribes. Because the Orkneys, it seems, were a very important place in Neolithic society. And you might think that, but they're so far away and so remote. How did these people in log canoes make it out to the Orkneys? But the thing is, islands at that time, in some ways, it was actually easier to travel by sea than it was to travel by land. Traveling by land was very treacherous. You had, with different tribes, predators, terrain was very difficult. Traveling by sea was relatively easy. And it seems that the Orkneys were an incredibly important site for the Neolithic peoples, which is why you have all these different stone circles and burial grounds there. Maybe almost like somewhere where people came to celebrate. It seems like they were places where people came to celebrate, possibly for fertility purposes. Maybe they were the equivalent of matchmaking festivals, that sort of thing. For the Neolithic peoples, it seems that they traveled, and they traveled from very far. And one way that we know about them traveling from far is because of this guy. And he is called the Orkney Vault. And the Orkney Vault you only find on the Orkney Islands. You don't find him on the mainland Britain. And they have worked out that he came from modern day Belgium. And for a long time, they had different theories about why the Vault was there. They've worked out that it was actually with Neolithic people traveling from mainland Europe to the Orkneys. They brought these voles with them, possibly accidentally, but it was at exactly that time that the vole came over. And they have this as categorical proof that people were traveling from very far to come to the Orkneys in Neolithic times. So there's no doubt that they're a very, very important site. If you come to the British Isles and you're keen on Neolithic structures, you must go to the Orkneys. It's the most incredible place to visit. You don't have to fly there. You can get a boat. You can get a boat from Aberdeen. You can get a boat from near Thurso on the far northern shore. Again, as with places in Ireland that I've talked about and the Lake District stone circles, these are slightly off the beaten track. They're almost still best kept secrets. So I would highly recommend you go there if you're interested in Neolithic stone circles and burial chambers. We are going to have to come all the way down now. We're going to come down from Orkney. We're going to get a plane all the way down to London. And from London, we're going to get a bus for 2 hours to the west, all the way to our final destination, which is, as you know, Stonehenge. Now, Stonehenge is by far the most famous Neolithic site in the world, probably, let's face it. As Mara said, these days, it's quite a commercial experience. It's still incredible to visit, and I recommend you do, but it involves, there's a big visitor center, there's a whole rigmarole about how you have to get on a bus at a certain time, go to the stones, you can't touch the stones. But it's very iconic to visit. But what I recommend to people when they go to Stonehenge is there's one thing you must do on the way, even if you go with a tour operator, beg them, is that you first visit this town called Avebury on the way. Now, on this map, you can see Stonehenge is on this famous plain called Salisbury Plain, which is in the southwest of England. Southwest of England, they all talk like that. I always say to people that they talk like pirates, although that's a little bit offensive. But yes, in the southwest of England, where they talk like pirates, and apologies to anybody from the southwest of England here. Stonehenge is on Salisbury Plain, and as you can see, all to the north of it, there's lots of different Neolithic sites. And Avebury, I think, is the most amazing one to visit, and it's just 20 miles north of Stonehenge. You can visit it easily on the way or after Stonehenge, and it is a textbook English henge, and there's 3 different stone circles in Avebury. They were all built at different times. As with Stonehenge, it was an ongoing building project. And the thing that's really interesting about Avebury, as you can see from this photograph, there's the henge. You can see the mound with the ditch on the inside. But in medieval times, they built a village across the henge. So Avebury is a henge interrupted by a medieval village. And inside the henge, in fact, Avebury henge, the outer stone circle, is the largest stone circle, Neolithic stone circle in Europe. But then on the inside that, there's another 2 stone circles, which you can see remainders of. Sadly, because of the human settlement within the stones, in medieval times, when we became incredibly Christian in England, they thought that all standing stones and stone circles were satanic and the stuff of witchcraft. So a lot of the stones were destroyed and pushed over by superstitious medieval Christians. However, a lot of them have been reassembled in Avebury. But it's, compared to Stonehenge, I think it's a brilliant experience because you can go right up to the stones, you can touch them. I don't think you're allowed to climb on them, but people do, but officially you're not allowed to. And it's an incredible place to walk around. And it's also a very picturesque English village, right in the middle of the English countryside. And there's always lots of, what I remember Stonehenge being like when I was a child, there's lots of hippies sitting around banging drums, that sort of thing. It's a very esoteric atmosphere, very interesting village shops where you can buy magic stones and things like that. So Avebury is a really special place to visit, I think, and you can easily do it before or after going to Stonehenge. But this whole area is full of things to visit. For example, this yet another burial chamber next door to Avebury and Stonehenge called West Kennet Long Barrow. This is what it looks like on the inside. But really, what we're all excited about is this Stonehenge, the most iconic of all the stone circles. As you can see here, it's been fenced off. The poor sheep, they're being pulled into the middle of the stone circle, but even they aren't allowed into the middle of the stone circle because it's been closed off from humans, except for one day of the year, which is the summer solstice, when it was the solstice lines up with 2 of the outside stones, and people are allowed to go in and touch the stones. Other than that, you're not allowed to go near the stones. You can walk around the stones. But Stonehenge, like Avebury, has gone through different iterations. Okay, so the one that we know now is this, and there's 2 sets of stones that there's all sorts of stones in Stonehenge. Some people are real Stonehenge boards, and all the stones are numbered. They've got numbers and special names. And but the two main ones I'm going to go over today are these ones on the outside are called the Sarson Stones, Sarsen. And these Sarson Stones on the outside used to be a circle. Okay, in fact, like this, you can see here, the circle on the outside, that's the Sarson Stones. And then on the inside, there's a horseshoe configuration of Sarson Stones on the inside, which you can see here. This is what they look like when they were complete. And then in between the Sarson Stones circle on the outside and the Sarson Stones on the inside is these other row of stones. Now, these are the famous blue stones that you hear people going on and on about in Stonehenge. So the blue stones, they're not the massive ones with the lintels on top. They're the tiny little stones behind them. You can see them here. And what's confusing about them is that they're not blue. They are grey, like the Sarson Stones. So they're quite hard to identify. But these are the famous blue stones of Stonehenge. And they're famous because the Sarson Stones, we know where they came from. They came from a quarry not that far from Stonehenge, maybe about 20 miles away. So that was quite an achievement for them to bring those Sarson Stones to Stonehenge. But the blue stones arrived much earlier than the Sarson Stones, and they came from 140 miles away in Wales, in a place called in Pembrokeshire in Wales. Now, this has always been a great mystery about how they got the blue stones. And the one thing that we do know is that originally Stonehenge would have looked very different. And it would have been this, as you can see here, what they call blue henge. And it would have just consisted of the blue stones. And they would have been in a large circle, like the one in Orkney, the Brodgar, probably a similar size. And then they changed the configuration over the years. But there's always been a mystery about how they got these stones, these blue stones, from Pembrokeshire in Wales all the way to Salisbury Plain. There's been various theories over the years. One popular one was that they carried them from the quarries here in Wales down to the sea, and they carried them around the coast on boats and up the Bristol Channel and then across to Stonehenge. They tried to recreate boats that they would have used in this time in 2001, and they carried some of these stones. These blue stones would have weighed the same as a small car, and the boat sank instantly. So they think it's more likely they carried them across land. But actually, recently, there was an even more exciting development. And the thing about Stonehenge and all these sites is that we're changing our mind about them all the time. That recently, an archaeologist, a professor from UCL, University City of London University, came up with this theory that, in fact, that the blue Stonehenge already existed in Wales as a stone circle, and the people of Stonehenge had basically stolen the blue Stonehenge from Wales and removed the henge and replanted it essentially in Salisbury Plain. Not necessarily either stole, or perhaps the people in Wales decided to move and migrate across to the east to Salisbury Plain, Stonehenge, and they brought with them the stones, the blue stones, which were very symbolic for them, possibly representing their ancestors who they venerated. So this is new, and he managed to find holes in the ground where the blue stones would have stood in Wales. And it's very interesting because this actually correlates to this myth that from Geoffrey of Monmouth, who famously wrote the Arthurian legends. He wrote that that Merlin sent his men to the land of Ireland to steal these giants, these stones, basically. And at the time, Wales would have actually been considered part of Ireland. So it's strange that there is a correlation between this seemingly implausible myth from Geoffrey of Monmouth to what we've actually recently discovered about these blue stones being lifted from Wales and moved to Stonehenge. Salisbury Plain, where Stonehenge is, you can see it here in this photograph, is a chalk land. It's very chalky land. And we think that in Neolithic times, the rest of the area around there, like Avebury, for example, would have been covered in oak forests. but actually where Stonehenge was likely to have not been woodland. So maybe it really stood out as a place because it was exposed and out in the open, surrounded by woodland. But anyway, it became a very sacred site, and it's been through many different configurations, as I say. And the one that we all recognize now is just the latest one. And they also found in these holes where they believed the bluestones were originally, they found lots of remains of cremated bodies, up to 150 bodies. So at different times it was used for burial. But largely it's a great mystery, really, the exact use of it. As I say, we think that all these stone circles and burial chambers, they were used to venerate ideas of the cycles of nature, the circular cycle, if the changing of the seasons, death and birth, rebirth, fertility, all these things which would have made up the core of these early religions, we believe. These days, Stonehenge, as I say, it's a very commercial experience. You have to go to this enormous visitor center. If you don't want to do that, you get a very good sight of Stonehenge on this famous motorway, as we call it, freeway you'd call it in the United States, called the A404, and it drives right past Stonehenge. I remember as a kid, you could actually just pull up at the side of the motorway and go and walk across the field and go up to the stones, but it's all different now. It's all under lock and key. But you get it's incredible when you're driving along this freeway in southwest of London and southwest of England, and you suddenly see Stonehenge appear on your right or on your left, but generally on your right for me. But as you can see, because it's a single carriageway motorway, it gets very, very busy and it's completely chock-a-block full of cars. So they've been talking about building a new tunnel, which is very controversial in this country, because in order to build the tunnel, to build a dual carriageway motorway, they're going to have to dig up some of this ancient sacred ground. So very unpopular with lots of people, but will possibly go ahead. But you get a fantastic view of Stonehenge from the A404 if you just want to have a quick look at it from the car. And it's been touristically, it's been an incredibly popular site for a long time. The Romans used to visit Stonehenge. It was a very popular site for Romans to visit when they arrived in around 43 AD. And ever since then, it's been a very popular site. This is a very famous painting by John Constable from the 19th century. And it was marveled about in the 19th century. It was during the 20th century, it went through some very sad times. It was bought by a guy called Cecil Chubb in 1915. He bought it as a birthday present for his wife. He bought it for £6,000, which doesn't seem like a lot, but in those days it would have been about the equivalent of $700,000. So quite a generous birthday present for his wife. But he bought it at an auction house, and some years after that, he was pressured to sell it back to Great Britain, and ever since then, it's become a protected heritage site. But for a long time, people used to come to Stonehenge with a chisel, a hammer and a chisel. They used to chisel off bits of stone and take it home with them, much like people did with the Berlin Wall in 1989. So it's for reasons like that, they eventually had to put up this fence around Stonehenge and stop people from touching the stones and gaining access to the stones. However, they do a couple of times a year allow people access to it. For example, in the solstice, in fact, we'll come back to this photograph. Here is a photograph of in the 80s. This is around the time when I visited when I was a kid. Not during this event, I hasten to add, but this was, they used to have free festivals, like a precursor, like a sort of Woodstock, Glastonbury type thing, called the Stonehenge Festival in the 80s, and they'd have bands would set up and play. It was a very exciting place where people would go. Nowadays, they are a bit stricter about that. They have one at the solstice, which we can see from this photograph here. And at the solstice, everybody's allowed to come, although it's very heavily policed. I was going to come back to this photograph because we associate Stonehenge a lot with the Druids, don't we? But as I said earlier on, there's actually no evidence that the Druids ever used Stonehenge or any of the stone circles. The Druids were from a much later time. They were more Iron Age spiritual leaders in Britain. So it's from a different time completely. But nowadays, modern Druids still love to celebrate the solstices at Stonehenge, but the actual links between Druidism and Stonehenge and stone circles are tenuous, to say the least. But yes, we're going to end here with this photograph of Stonehenge at the summer solstice. And really, what's amazing about Stonehenge, I think, is the fact that it is such a mystery, and will always remain a mystery, what it was there for. And you think, you know, in 5,000 years' time, when people find our remains, they're not going to know what lots of things were for. They're not going to. The one thing that's very hard to understand about people from so long ago is what they believed in, what they thought about. But I thought I would end quickly with a very famous poem by William Wordsworth about Stonehenge. William Wordsworth, we touched on him before. He was one of the famous lake poets, but he was very into nature, and he loved Stonehenge around the same time as Constable. And he wrote about Stonehenge: "Pile of Stonehenge, so proud to hint, yet keep thy secrets, thou hast to stand and hear. Thou lovest to stand and hear. The plain resounding to the whirlwind's sweep, inmate of lonesome nature's endless year," which I really like. Inmate of nature's lonesome nature's endless year. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope that you got something from that. As always, there's a lot to fit in, but I hope I can answer some questions if you've got any. Thank you, and thank you, Mara, as well.
George, as always, excellent. You surprise me every time with your historical knowledge that just seems to flow from your head like it's some kind of, I don't know, machine. It's amazing to me. I don't even think I could have done that justice by reading it off line per line. But there's a lot of questions because you've given us a lot of information. So there's a lot of questions around it. I always scratch my head and wonder, and I don't mean literally, I just scratch my head, but I always scratch my head and wonder the how, you know, how did these stones get here? Where'd they come from? Why was it important? And it just seems so strange. I mean, I just can't fathom it. We're going to go to the Q&A. If you have a question for George and you're on Zoom, type it in the Q&A portion of the Zoom toolbar, not the chat. We'll be responding to questions on the Q&A. If you are interested in looking at future travel with my group, I've given you a list of our group tours that are coming up on the right-hand side of the slide, if I've been so good to share it. And again, if you don't mind my crazy dog, if you can hear that in the background, if you would like to leave a tip, by all means, I will share it again in the chat, how you can leave a tip. But there are plenty of ways through my website, which has a secure credit card module as well. You could use PayPal or Venmo. So I'll share that to you guys now. And then George, if you're ready, we're going to open up the Q&A. So we can go through these questions and try to answer as many as possible.
Okay, as always with the Q&A, I definitely don't always know the answers to all the questions, but I would like to think that I'm at least honest when I don't. But the first one I can definitely answer: Newgrange, Avebury, Maize, which do you like best as a guide and personally? I would definitely say that I enjoy being in Avebury almost more than anywhere else in England, both on tour and personally. There's something really magical about the atmosphere, and this sort of strange combination of Neolithic stone circles and quaint English village is really magical. And I've every time I've taken a group there on the way to or on the way back from Stonehenge, they always just have the most awesome time. They always love it so much. Jim, how is it proven that Turkish farmers ended up in Ireland? Well, I mean, these Turkish farmers, it's a trite thing to call them. I was just calling them that for the ease of communication. But that's the spread of agriculture came from there. It's well documented, well proven. They found remains of people in England that are very close to people from Iberian Peninsula, from modern day Spain, who originally came from what is now Anatolia in Turkey. So yes, it's well proven, well proven. What different tribes are there, and what are tribe names? We don't really know anything about names or language we don't know anything about language or names. That's one of the great mysteries is knowing anything like that, because it wasn't passed on by writing or word of mouth. How do you know they wore makeup? I can't remember the exact details, but they would have found materials. You know, the Egyptians wore makeup as well. They would have found materials, and experts would have worked out that they were for wearing makeup. It was probably things like charcoal, I would imagine, things similar to that. How was it determined that Cheddar Man had blue eyes and dark skin? I can't remember. I ended up getting sucked into a rabbit hole on the internet about different people with ideological stances arguing about how Cheddar Man would have looked, and it's not an area that I personally want to get sucked into. But you can if you want, Cynthia Boyd. And there's lots of people disagreeing about how he would have looked, about how dark his skin was or how blue his eyes were. But yeah, it is an approximation. What is the diameter of this image? Scale, which image exactly, Joe? In fact, if you can get back to us, I will carry on with some other questions, and then so the diameter of which image, Joe? I'll try and answer that. Liliana, what people had a language similar to Basque? Okay, well, they think that the Neolithic peoples of Britain, that the language they spoke, if it resembled any modern day language, it would resemble the Basque language, which is a very unusual language. The Basque country is, as you probably know, just next to the Pyrenees near France and Spain. I meant, how large are these henges? Okay, the henges are pretty big. I did actually write down some numbers that I neglected to give you. So, for example, Brodgar, the diameter is 104 meters diameter for Brodgar in Orkney. So Stonehenge, the blue circles, would have been roughly around the same. So around 100 meters diameter, so pretty big. Beth Carroll, what was the intent of the quartz wall, and what was expected lifespan at the time? Okay, the expected lifespan, I only know from the research saying that they thought that 30 years was more than one life. So I would imagine, 20s probably. The intent of the quartz wall, the 1960s rebuild, I guess, was for support. There was a utilitarian reason for building it. But yes, lots of people are outraged about the quartz wall. How different is the angle of the winter solstice now as when Newgrange was built? That's a great question, Susan Schmidt. So great that they named her twice. How different is the angle? They think that it has changed slightly, yeah, which means that the days of which the winter solstice sun lines up is ever so slightly different. I can't give you an exact number, but you're right that it has changed ever so slightly because of the axis of the Earth changing ever so slightly. Maria, I always wondered how the grass in the green lawns or pastures stays short in England, according to Pictures Television. Is it mowed? It's mowed. Easy answer. It's mowed. Actually, livestock as well. Traditionally, you'd use livestock, wouldn't you? But also, yeah, nowadays mostly mowing. What was the height of that cave? Which cave was that, Christina? Do you mean Newgrange? I can't remember. Newgrange. I know that Newgrange was the actual height of the whole hill was 14 meters high. So I know that the cave went up very high. So yeah, probably, I don't know, 10 meters, something like that. Catherine, Newgrange, how did they place their dead in the womb? Buried, preserved, etc. I know that they had the bones and the skeletons basically all jumbled up together of their ancestors. And there's these alcoves off the main chamber, and that's where the remains were kept and venerated. So when the sun came in, it would shine on the bones. Rhonda, isn't there a line of circles and stones sites that runs north-south through much of UK? Is there a line? I mean, I imagine there's more than one line. I imagine there's probably quite a lot of lines. This sounds like, I mean, basically the answer to that is I don't know, but I could look into it. But it sounds like something that, people are always making these sort of cosmic ley lines and things like that. But yeah, maybe is the answer, but I don't know. Linda, rainbows over Tara are beautiful. I'm glad you've been there, Linda. It's incredible. As is the winter solstice at Newgrange. Have you been in Newgrange at that time, George? Do you guide tours to these sites? I have not, but for the last 2 years in a row, I'm proud to say I have entered the lottery to go into Newgrange at winter solstice. So maybe I'll win that lottery. Yes, Sawain, correct. Well corrected. And thank you from this modern pagan druid. Linda is a modern pagan druid for the updated and more accurate info on sites. Well, thank you, Linda. I'm glad that I didn't. I'm glad that I didn't embarrass myself. Who next? Have you been to Cairn, Papel Hill, Kilmartin Glen, and Temple Woods in Scotland? I'm actually from. I don't sound like it, but I am actually originally from Scotland, and I'm afraid I don't recognise any of those names. No. Temple Woods. There's a lot of temple things in Scotland because of the Knights Templar, but no, I'm afraid I can't think of where they are initially. What was the meaning behind the stone circles? As I said, the stone circles we think were like a cross between a church and a theatre, possibly like a court, maybe even a court of law. This is where things were decided. Leslie, have you seen the Rollright stones near Stow on the Wold? Not sure if they are Neolithic. I think they are, and I have seen them, but I don't know enough about them to confirm that they are Neolithic. But yes, everywhere in that area in southwest England, there's so many different sites to see. It's incredible. The Tomb of the Eagles and Castle Bloody in Orkney are intriguing. Yes, Linda, the Tomb of the Eagles, I know all about. You have to go in there on a skateboard on your back. If you don't like tight spaces, don't go to the Tomb of the Eagles. But yes, that also looks incredible in Orkney. Patricia, what were the roofs made of? Similar to Chaco Canyon Kivas. Patricia, you know more than I know. I don't know what a Chaco Canyon Kiva is. The roofs of, for example, Scarra Bray were made of, so it would have been the flagstones, and then on top of that, they would have had basically mud, and then on top of that, grass. Mary, the house in Scarra Bray, was it entirely underground? Was there a way for light to get in? I don't believe there was any light other than the fire in the houses of Scarra Bray. Does this pottery have Egyptian influence? I'm not qualified to answer that, but I think that it probably does. Yeah, if you think about the migration of peoples throughout human history, they basically came from Africa and the Middle East, and they moved west. So yes, I would say certainly some of that influence traveled west. What type of stone is used for the stone circles? So, for example, Stonehenge, it's limestone. The Sarson Stones are limestone, sorry, sandstone, not limestone, sandstone. And the blue stone is from this quarry in Wales, which is a type of stone called the blue stone. But yeah, generally made from sandstone, but also different types of stone depending on the stone circle. Patricia Caro, what book would you recommend to go over all of this history? Well, there's a lot of books, but the book that I read when I was young that got me into it was a book written by, this is quite obscure, but this is a book written by, there's an English rock star called Julian Cope, and he was in a group in the 80s called the Teardrop Explodes, and then he went a bit mad, and then he became obsessed with stone circles, and he wrote this great book called The Modern Antiquarian, and it's basically him doing a tour of all Neolithic sites around the British Isles. It's a fantastic book by Julian Cope. He's a very interesting character, but the book is called The Modern Antiquarian, and it's by Julian Cope. I don't know how you can probably get it on, you can probably read it online, you probably get a PDF. Sounds like Spinal Tap. Yes, very good. It was very much like Spinal Tap. I was wondering whether to put Spinal Tap reference into Stonehenge, but I didn't know how many people would get it. The rockumentary Spinal Tap has a great joke about when they have they want to build a Stonehenge for their stage set and they end up getting the proportions wrong. Anyway, you have to watch that yourselves. Penny Paul, have they been able to ID where the stone circle in the Orkneys came from? Yes, as I say, the one that you're talking about, the different stones came from lots of different areas of the Orkneys, and they've worked out exactly where in the Orkneys. So the different stones come from different islands and different bays in the Orkneys. I mean, I haven't got a list to hand, but yeah, they do know. George, do you know anything about the current archaeological dig on Orkney? I'm sorry, I don't, Joanna. I've got a friend that would. He actually works up in Orkney, but I'm afraid I don't know. I don't know is the answer. I know they only dig at certain times of the year, but not sure what they have found. I mean, it will be an ongoing work for forever. I think the Orkneys are so full of Neolithic sites and remains. Arlena Fink, there are a lot of UFO sightings in that area. True, if you say so. Michelle Wyman, how did Neolithic people actually build these stone henges? That's a really good question. So they would have used pulley systems. They would have used things like cages that they would have built out of wood. They would have put the stones in, then they would have pulled on ropes. So basically pulley systems, ropes, stone, that sort of thing. Marla, so interesting. Why is Stonehenge more famous than the other henges? Better marketing is a good question, isn't it? I think in some ways you could say it looks more iconic. I think part of the reason why it looks so iconic is because of the lintels being raised on the outside circle that makes it look very iconic. But yeah, there is something about the marketing of it as well that has made it more famous than the other henges. But it's also kind of one of the more nearly complete henges, really. As I say, I think Newgrange probably would have been if it hadn't been not discovered for a long time. But yeah, Stonehenge, yeah, you're right. It has got the sort of Disneyland status. What happened to the remains that were placed in the burial mounds? I hope that they were still there when the sites were uncovered and they were treated with care. I don't know the answer to that. I'm sure they would have been. I'm afraid some of them probably went straight off to museums in Dublin and London and places like that. But I don't know exactly. But yeah, they tend to treat these things with care. I mean, I think ones that were found in the 19th century and 18th century possibly not treated with so much care. They're probably in somebody's attic somewhere, gathering dust, but who knows? I heard that there are stones that light up astronomically at both the solstice and also Samhain. Is there a site that corresponds to Beltane? I don't know the answer to that. Beltane is the festival that, for those that don't know, it's the May Day festival. So it's the festival that is traditionally marks the beginning of summer, the time of great celebration. Even in Scotland, when I was growing up, we used to celebrate Beltane. There's a very wild festival we used to have on the top of a hill in Edinburgh. Christine, why are they called blue stones? Was that explained in our mistake? They are actually blue. They don't look blue, they're grey, but if you cut them open, they have a slightly bluish hue to them. Where in Wales was the possible original site of the blue stones henge? It's called Preseli. Preseli, Preseli, is the range of mountains where the blue stones definitely come from. They know the exact quarries where they came from. Liz Philp would love to know more about tours in Scotland or others in England, Wales, or Scotland. Okay, well, you could ask Mara. I know she organizes a lot of tours. Also, I mean, I work for a company called EF Tours. They do educational tours. They also do work with it. They have a company called Go Ahead Tours for adults. And they have all sorts of tours around England, Wales, Scotland. And there's other companies as well. But yes, try them for starters. Greta Tillman, is there any ideas as to how they got those huge stones there and stacked? Yeah, there's a few ideas. One idea used to be that they log rolled them. So that would involve, you've got a series of logs underneath the stones and you roll them along and then you move the log from the back to the front and then you roll it along. Very painstaking process. But actually recently they thought that maybe it's more likely that they tipped them. So there are a lot of people basically tipping the stones and then tipping them back again. So that's another theory. The tipping seems to be more popular than the log rolling these days. This is Stonehenge. Oh my God, Sonia Sharp. The road is the A303, not the A404. It just goes to show. I don't know my motorways in England very well. I'm sorry, Sonia Sharp. She's right. It's the 303. Marcia Simmons. So is it true that at Stonehenge now there is the fencing so you cannot even walk around the area inside the stones? That's correct, yeah. You can walk around the outside, the periphery of the stones, but you don't get anywhere near the stones, no way. Unless you go at the summer solstice, and in which case you'll be with lots of young inebriated people, which might be your idea of fun. Or else I think that if you want to pay lots and lots of money, you can get a VIP trip to Stonehenge where you can go up to the stones, but I think it's probably very expensive. Patrice Bauer, when was the fence put around Stonehenge? I was there in the 70s. It wasn't there. It wasn't there in the 70s. You're right. I think it was in 1977 was the year that they put a fence up around Stonehenge, and they stopped people from being able to go up there. Are there carvings on the rocks of Stonehenge? That's a really good question, Deborah. There are definitely carvings. I don't know of any really significant ones. And obviously there would have been carvings done similar with the Viking graffiti, but all the way from the Bronze Age upwards, people would have been carving on the stones of Stonehenge. So yes, is the answer. Anais Farah, how long would this tour take and approximately cost? Okay, well, this wasn't really like a tour that I would do in real life because there's a lot of jumping about. But if there was a tour like this involving the plane journey, we could do it all in a week, I would say. I don't know about the cost. Are the blue stones just standing loose on top of the ground, or are part of them dug into the ground? If so, how deep are they? Okay, so some of them have fallen over, but the ones that are in the ground, I don't know exactly how deep they are, I'm afraid. No, you'd have to look that up. Sorry. Julie Weston, where's George from? George is originally from Edinburgh in Scotland, but George has lived in London, in England, for more than 20 years. But my mum's Irish, my dad's English, so I'm kind of from all over, really. But Edinburgh is the short answer. And Duncan, are reservations required for Avebury, and is there a cost? Now, Avebury is completely free. There's a car park. You might have to pay a couple of pounds to park your car there, but it's a village. You can just walk around. You can do anything you want. It's completely free. That's why it's so great as well. Not because it's free, but because it's not got this commercial atmosphere to it. Janet O'Neill, do the tall stones extend into the ground for stability? Yes, they do. But again, as with the question of the blue stones, I'm afraid I don't know the exact numbers for how far they are into the ground. But yes, they are into the ground. Meg Dean, were the majority of the Neolithic structures shown recreated, especially Scarra Bray? No, I think that Scarra Bray, actually, they call it the Scottish Pompeii because it was so well, it was kept intact so well underneath the sand. That I think that Scarra Bray actually has not been tampered with very much. Newgrange has been tampered with a bit, and that's, if you were to speak to a real Neolithic snob, an archaeological snob, they would probably make noises about Newgrange because it was done in the 1960s. But yeah, so Scarra Bray, I think, is pretty legit. Lawrence Jacobs, is Stonehenge not a burial mound? Well, there were burials that took place there, but it was more a stone circle than a burial mound. But yeah, over the years, there were definitely burials of cremations that took place in Stonehenge. Yeah. Do the spirals on the stones in Newgrange come from India, where they also appear? Maria Bowman, that's a very good question. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm inclined to say yes, because I know that so much of the culture in Europe has its origins in around India, even down to language, the Indo-European languages like Sanskrit and things like that. So I would say there's a good likelihood is my answer to that, in my opinion. Jill Beckham, how much land area does Stonehenge cover? Oh God, I don't know the exact answer. As I say, the original blue stone circle was around 100-meter diameter. So it's about 100-meter diameter where the outside stones are on Stonehenge. How would they know where to make these henges? What materials were used, or how would they place these stones? It's a very good question. They were master engineers, and these people really knew what they were doing. And I guess some people would have been traveling and spreading the word of other stone circles. So there definitely would have been knowledge passed on from master builder to master builder, as has always happened throughout the ages. That's as good as a guess as I've got. About how tall are the Stonehenge stones? It's a good question. They're about, what are they? Maybe 10 feet, something like that. That's my guess. I haven't got the numbers to hand, I'm afraid. Donna Smith, this is more like it. My friend says that Stonehenge is a portal. To what? I don't know. I don't know either, but one of these days, if I find out, I will let you know. Elaine Camperley, is there admission to the Stonehenge Visitor Centre? There certainly is. Or for the bus tour that is mandatory to get to the Stonehenge Centre? Yes, you have to pay an admission fee. I can't remember exactly how much it is. It's probably about £20. And then once you get to the visitor centre, then they have various temporary exhibitions like a Neolithic Village. And then you have to get on a shuttle bus, which takes you up to the stones. And then you get a certain amount of time you're allowed to go around the stones. And then you get the shuttle bus back to the visitor centre. Matthew Ransom, I've linked the Stonehenge and other private research to bowl worship. Has anyone else? I don't know about bowl worship, but it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something about circles, wasn't there? Worship of the sun, worship of the moon. There's definitely something in the circle. Meg Dean, what happened to the Turkish farmers? Did they remain a mix of other? Here I am. There you are. We're all Turkish farmers. Patricia Coral, have the vehicles on the highway next to Stonehenge affected the stones with vibration? I don't know the answer to that, but probably not tragically so. I was very late. Is there any way I can get the recording? I think that Mara puts it on YouTube, Facebook and YouTube tomorrow, which you can find through the Girl Travel Tours Facebook page. Lisa Heitman, are Henges just the mound and the ditch? No burials? Do Henges need stones? Henges do not need stones. In fact, something that I forgot to say, and I apologize to people that aren't still here, the people that have left, that actually, technically speaking, Stonehenge isn't a henge, because Stonehenge, the ditch, is on the outside and not on the inside. So even though henges are named after Stonehenge, Stonehenge is the original henge, but it's not actually a henge, if you can get your head around that. Was Stonehenge reconstructed in modern times? The painting showed the stones fallen and tumbled down. Some of the stones that had fallen off were lifted and placed back. There was in 1900, famously, one of the lintel stones fell off. And at that point, they realized that it was a bit of a danger for the general public. So at that point, they upped their game with maintenance, looking after the stones. Redway Paula, brilliant presentation. I'm a resident of Salisbury. Oh, God. Okay, Salisbury is very close to Stonehenge. So yes, I'm glad that she liked the presentation. The question is, do you know anything about the suggestion that the blue stones used to be sonorous ringing rocks when struck with a bell-like sound? I don't know anything about that, but it seems feasible. Yeah, I think that sound waves are so important, and vibrations. If you think about like string theory and these new theories that are coming about, yeah, I would be very interested in finding out more about that. Good question. Galia, can you explain the headstone and the Stonehenge Avenue that leads from this stone? I think I have the right terminology. Yes, now the Stonehenge Avenue leads down to the River Avon, and the headstone is the stone that lines up with the summer solstice in Stonehenge. But yes, the avenue is famously the one that leads right down to the River Avon. And there's avenues linking up all these Neolithic sites in this area as well. What sort of roof would the Orkney Island houses have, please? So the roofs, as I said before, would be made of what we call in Scotland a midden, which is actually, it's kind of waste. They would have used waste and mud and then grass on top of that. So it's very great isolation, used for isolation, insulation outside of the flagstones. Why can't they find out more about this era? It's very interesting coming from the DNA of Irish and British. Why can't they find out more? Because it wasn't written down. We don't really know anything about their language. We know stuff about archaeological evidence, but as I said before, what's hard to know about any culture is beliefs. What do people believe? What do they think? What do they believe? That's almost impossible to know without things being written down or passed on by word of mouth. Alex Barry, some Sarson stones appear extremely well trimmed and shaped into regular rectangles, while others are quite unfinished. Was such trimming done in situ or at the quarry? It's a good question that I'm afraid I don't know the answer to, Alex, but you could quickly look it up. Yeah, I don't know. I imagine maybe, my guess is at the quarry. But yes, I'd be interested to find out. Vicky, are the barrows on the Isle of Wight Neolithic or later? Also, Longman on the Downs in Sussex. Okay, Isle of Wight, I don't know the answer to. Longman on the Downs in Sussex, you mean, yeah, Longman of Wilmington. Now, he's much, much later. He's actually an Iron Age, I think, or actually even later than that. I think they discovered that he was much later than they originally thought. He's something like 16th century. Is this famous, for those of you that don't know, it's a famous chalk man on the side of a hill in Sussex, and he's holding two staffs in either hand. And it's very, very recognizable landmark on this hill in the South Downs in Sussex. But yeah, he's actually much later. How do the ages of the bluestones compare with the Sarson Stones at Stonehenge? I don't know the exact numbers, I'm sorry. I know that the Sarson Stones are much more recent than the bluestones. Questions from a third grader. Can I email Mr. McFall for a report on these sites? Yeah, why not? Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not an expert, but I certainly will do my best. Yes, if Mara doesn't mind exchanging emails, I'm happy to answer it. Sue, we toured in Ireland, and I was amazed at the stones that just seem to be in random farm fields. Who owns the stones, the government or the farmer? That's a very good question. I would imagine, well, Ireland is a different scenario entirely, but I would imagine the farmer a lot of the time. I know that in some sites in England they had to sell it back to the government, they had to sell it back to the country, basically. I would imagine it's the same in Ireland. I'm very interested in the floor of Stonehenge. Is it beneath the grass and sod, any dressing, gravel or flags? I don't know the answer to that, sorry. George, amazing tour. We've been to Stonehenge, Avebury and Newgrange. You also mentioned a Wales virtual tour you've done, but I can't find it on the website. I think it's called Wales and Cornwall, virtual tour with Wales and Cornwall. Did it back in, can't remember, in the summer.
If you're not finding it right away, there is a little more button at the bottom of the page. So you may have to click on the more button to see more of the virtual tours that were longer ago.
Thank you. Christine, are there active archaeology digs still going on in the area? Absolutely, yes, all over. As I say, there's this recent find very recently about the bluestones coming from a circle in Wales. And there's always digs going on all the time. There's a great television program in the UK called Time Team that you can probably watch somewhere on cable TV, but it's all these archaeologists digging up parts of Britain. And I don't know if you've ever socialized with any archaeologists, but they're quite memorable people. They're all quite they're a bit Hobbit-like, and they love drinking beer and things like that. They're very merry people, but it's a good program. Time Team. Yes, the sizes and shapes of stones differ from henge to henge. Is there significance to these choices? I think it's probably to do with where the stones are sourced, availability of tools. So no, I think there's probably a randomness to it. Carrie, is there a source that shows where all henges are located? There probably is if you look it up online. There's a lot of henges, and I've been through the most famous ones, but there's other ones in Cornwall as well and all over. But yeah, there probably is a comprehensive website. Marie, were there any major cultures between Stonehenge builders and the Celts? Yeah, well, after the Neolithic, we have what we call the Bronze Age. So the Bronze Age, I guess, would be veering into what we call the Age of the Celts. But yeah, sort of late Neolithic, early Bronze Age is what you could look up. Oh, here we go. Mike Parker Pearson's thoughts that Stonehenge was for the dead and Durrington walls for the living. Yes, I have read about that. I think that's very interesting. Durrington walls is another Neolithic site near Stonehenge where they had an enormous wooden henge. Obviously, it doesn't exist anymore because it's made from wood. But yeah, there's this idea that Stonehenge was to commemorate the dead and Woodhenge was to commemorate the living. Stones are obviously not alive. Wood represent life. So I think there's probably quite a lot in that theory. Yes. Susan, I can answer this. How far is Newgrange from Dublin? 30 miles. Kathy, have they ever found out how the flat stones got on top of the column stones? They think it's by like a winching process involving ropes and something that basically resembles an old catapult in many ways, is how they think they got up there. The very first henge shown just before the fellow in the log boat. Ah, Joe, it's a good question that I don't know the answer to. I'm sorry. When I looked it up, I can't remember. I was just looking up a sort of textbook henge, but I forgot to look up the actual henge that it was. I think it's in Cornwall, but I can't remember exactly. I'm sorry. Virginia, in visiting Scarra Bray several years ago, I believe I was told the Henge of Brodgar in Orkneys and other henges down the British Isles line up to Stonehenge for the winter solstice. Comment, please. It could be true. I don't know the exact answer to that, I'm afraid. No. Marie, I'd heard there were burial grounds discovered around Stonehenge. Has there been any research done on them? Yes, there were. I mean, there's a lot of burial grounds around Stonehenge, and even as I said, in Stonehenge itself, there was remains were buried as well. But there's constant research going on. Yes. Did you call the Neolithic woman White Hawk? Yes, I think she's called White Hawk Woman, probably to do with the place where she was found. She's probably found in a place called White Hawk in Sussex. How were the hunter-gatherers completely displaced by the Anatolian settlers? I guess what I mean is that there's no evidence for the two groups to having mingled and having interbred. It seems that the Anatolian people became the dominant race, and the hunter-gatherers gradually died out. Maria, did you know that before the Europeans came to America, all people in North America had brown eyes? I didn't know that, but it doesn't surprise me that they all had brown eyes. Yeah, interesting, but thank you for that, Maria. Aphrodite says, do you think that maybe earlier stone circles and megalithic monuments of Anatolia could have influenced the ones explored here? I think very possibly, yes. I don't know that much about Anatolian stone circles. I have a very good friend who is Anatolian. She probably would be able to tell me about it. But I don't know the exact influence. I know that there seems to have been a period of time before they started building. So about 1,000 years between arriving in, for example, the British Isles, where most of the stone circles were built. There seems to be about 1,000 years before they started building. But I don't know the influence of Anatolian stone circles. Is Stonehenge the only stone circle that featured lintel stones? Thank you, Alex. It's a very good question. As far as I'm aware, it is. There were obviously what we call dolmens that involve maybe 2 or 3 stones with a large stone on top of them that were very popular all around. There's very famous ones in Wales, for example. But yes, I think it's the lintel stones. It's a very tidy design, isn't it? And I think it's the only one I'm aware of that has the lintel stones. What crops were grown? Wheat, barley, those sorts of crops. They're the first ones that spring to mind, Janice. Marie, are there similar henges in other parts of Europe? That's a good question. In Brittany and France, there are. And there seem to be a couple in Serbia. But generally, most of the henges seem to be in the British Isles and Brittany. Brittany is obviously culturally quite British in lots of ways. There's a lot of parallels between the later Celtic cultures between Brittany and France and the British Isles. When does a person enter the lottery for Newgrange? You can do it right now. There's a website. It's quite a rustic website, and you can if you just Google lottery Newgrange solstice, and then you can enter your details, and you'll automatically be put in the lottery for next year. Uma, hi, I'm sorry I probably missed the link of Pagan and Stonehenge relationship. Can you please confirm brief info? Okay, well, Pagan is, I always say this in these tours, it's kind of a lazy word, which actually really just means pre-Christian. So it's not a very helpful, it's about as unhelpful a term as prehistoric. Pagan just means pre-Christian. So the pagan, when we talk about pagan religions, it could be the Druids, or it could be the Neolithic peoples before them. They had very different beliefs. But generally speaking, when we talk about pagan religions, we talk about it's kind of worshipping the seasons and nature, the sun, the moon. So it's more agricultural. So the link between pagan and the pagan religion and Stonehenge was completely intertwined. Stonehenge was astronomical. It was there to, as with all the stone circles, it was there to basically map and plot the changing of the seasons, which was crucial for farmers. It was also it's completely the link. They're completely intertwined, basically. For an agricultural religion worshipping the seasons, it was their equivalent of a cathedral, basically. What is the name of the 97 large stones surrounding Newgrange? I can't remember the exact name. I remember they're all numbered meticulously, and people argue about the configuration of the different numbers. I can't remember the names of them, I'm afraid. Chaco Canyon is in New Mexico, US. You're right, it is. And I've been to New Mexico. It's absolutely incredible. One of the most incredible parts of America that I remember seeing. Have you seen the Callanish stones on the Isle of Harris? And can you tell us about it? I am ashamed to admit, being Scottish, that I haven't been to the Callanish stones on the Isle of Harris, but I know that people, I didn't have time to talk about them, but yes, the Callanish stones on the Isle of Harris are people that are into stone circles go nuts for the Callanish stones. So if you're interested in them, look them up after this. Callanish stones on the island of Lewis, Lewis. Sandstone and limestone can deteriorate relatively easily. Have there been signs of that? Yes, I think the stones are deteriorating somewhat. I don't know exactly what precautions are being taken to deal with that. And do any other sites get vandalized for pieces of stone to take home? I've been to Stonehenge back before the fences and also loved Newgrange 3 years ago. It seemed very safe then. I don't think they really do get vandalized anymore because we have a reverence for these sites now that people definitely didn't have in the early 20th century, and certainly not before that. No, I mean, we didn't have this great reverence for the past that we do now, certainly not. So I don't think sites really get vandalized. I think there was recently something, one of the stones had one of these Extinction Rebellion signs graffitied on it or something like that. Sometimes a political cause will put a bit of graffiti on a stone or something just for the publicity, but not generally not, no. Did the blue henge stones used to be blue? If not, why were they called blue stones? Well, they don't look blue, but they are actually slightly blue. They've got a bluish hue to them. If you cut them through and you see a cross section, they are actually kind of blue. Lorraine, was Woodhenge built at the same time as Stonehenge? I think it was a little bit later. I can't remember the exact years, but yeah, Woodhenge is also very interesting. If you're interested in this period, also look up Woodhenge. What's the best time of the year to visit Stonehenge? I'm in the Caribbean. I just want to go when it's not too cold. Michelle, I have been to Stonehenge in all weather conditions, and it's memorable in the freezing cold rain and wind. I've got to say, it's very memorable. If you want to get a nice bit of weather in the UK, sadly, you're never guaranteed it. But I think between May, June, July, you're probably going to have your best bet of good weather around then, I think. Yeah, August seems to be quite rainy these days, but yeah, I would say something like May, June, July is relatively safe. Have you read Sarum by Edward Rutherford? I confess I have not, but I will make a note of it and look it up after this. Were the builders of the Henges indentured servants or slaves? From Joan Wilson. I don't know the answer to that. I would like to think not. I like to think of these societies as being relatively egalitarian. Does the visitor centre at Stonehenge have a museum, and if so, what's in it? So it does. It's got like a permanent exhibition about Neolithic communities. It's quite interesting. Linda Haggerstone, adding to an earlier point, Templewood burial information sits in the Kelvin Grove Museum in Glasgow. She lives in Paisley. Hi, Linda, how you doing? I'm sorry that I don't know that. It's because I'm from the East Coast, I confess. Okay, so that's very interesting. So this Templewood burial site in Scotland that I'm ashamed to admit I don't know anything about, which I need to look up after this. It's there's a great museum in Glasgow called Kelvin Grove Museum, and if you go to Glasgow, go to the museum and check out everything about this Temple Wood burial site in Scotland. Thank you very much for that. Natalie Fong, I've heard that people tried to go up to the stones at Stonehenge before it was fenced off, but some unknown force prevented them from moving forward. It was never my experience, and I did do it a few times as a child. I haven't heard those stories. I'm afraid I don't know about it. Do people live near Stonehenge? Yes, they do. A lot of people who are in the army live in Stonehenge, because Salisbury Plain, where Stonehenge is a military area where they do a lot of military training. So there's a lot of military towns all around Stonehenge. What do the stones symbolize? I think there's various interpretations. One is the ancestors. One is, it's a veneration of ancestors. Somebody else suggested the dead as opposed to the living. Why can't a person go inside the Stone Age rocks? I guess in Stonehenge, a combination of preservation and also cost. I think in order to police them, it would cost a lot of money. And also because it's a business these days as well. Carol Wallace, I knew I should have mentioned Outlander. I'm sorry I didn't mention it. Has the Outlander craze increased tourism at many of the Stone Circle locations, even outside of Scotland? So those of you who don't know, Outlander is this fictional program set in Scotland during the Jacobite Rebellion. And I think there's a time travel component where they travel through time through a stone circle. My experience of touring with groups is that, yes, they all want to go to the stone circle that doesn't exist in reality, but we take them to the Clava cairns just next to Culloden battle site, and we basically let them believe that that's the stones from Outlander. But yes, there's a huge increase in interest because of Outlander, yes. You can't go near the stones, yeah, because of preservation reasons, exactly. Will the Q&A be recorded as well? I hope not, but possibly. Yes, it will. What's the purpose of the tunnels they're proposing? It's because there's a huge traffic problem on the A303. And A303, there's a huge traffic problem, as you could see from that photograph with the gridlock traffic. So they need to expand the motorway to a dual carriageway. And the only way they can do that is by digging a tunnel and changing the route of the motorway. But it's very controversial because it's ancient sacred land. If Stonehenge isn't a henge, what is it technically? Well, that's a henge paradox, because Stonehenge is the henge that all henges are named after. The word henge comes from Stonehenge, but actually Stonehenge is technically not a henge. So it's like a paradox. There you go. What is it technically? I don't know. Who knows? A stone circle. How could the lentils possibly fall off? Says Cheryl. I'm laughing because you said lentils instead of lintels, and because Stonehenge was traditionally associated with hippies and New Age people, I'm imagining the hippies eating lentils on top of Stonehenge and maybe dropping their lentils onto the ground. I'm sure that there have been some lentils spilled from Stonehenge in the past, but the lintels, how do they drop off? I guess just through gravity. They've been there for such a long time that they needed to be rearranged slightly and reconfigured. Tamara, where are the stones on top? Where there are stones on top, are they now attached with modern means so they don't fall off? I believe they are, yes. I think they did actually attach the lintels. I need to double check that. It's a really good question. How about Knowth in Ireland, Lyndon Nielsen? It's sadly for the last question, I don't really know the answer. I don't know much about Knowth. I'm going to have to look it up immediately after this tour. It's not somewhere I've been on tour before, but I'm going to have to look it up so that I don't get caught short again. Thank you all for your questions.
Amazing. You got through them. Very good. Very good job. I know as we give you accolades for getting through all the questions, there will be more questions that come through, but that's okay. So an hour's worth of Q&A on top of an hour's worth of presentation. Thank you so very much. Another area will be added to our bucket list. One of the viewers texted me and said, wouldn't it be great to give the poll again afterwards to see how the audience changes its view on whether they want to visit the place that was just presented or not? And you can certainly understand why All of our bucket lists are getting so long during COVID because we're experiencing so many great virtual tours that we want to go visit all of these places now. So thank you, George, as always, for bringing us your knowledge and your wit. We appreciate both. And thank you to the audience for showing up week after week, and we really appreciate it. We will see you here next week for a little bit of Scotch on our tour through Scotland, highlighting the distillery regions. So take care, have a good day, and we will see you then. Thanks, George. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you.